The Guns on Pegs podcast is brought to you by ITAP Group. Hello and welcome to the Guns on Pegs podcast. My name is George Brown. Now, as you know, if you've been listening for a while, the Guns on Pegs podcast has undergone one or two changes over the last few years. What started out as an irregular podcast with a few of the Guns on Pegs team became a fortnightly affair with Chris and I at the helm, occasional cameo appearances from Digby when one or other of us was unavailable. This episode marks yet another transition. As you probably also know, Chris and I have been working extremely hard on the Scribehound project for some time, and earlier this month we launched our second channel, Scribehound Gardening. Now, with that and with the rapid and ambitious growth that we've got planned for the next year or so, Chris needs to free up a bit of time in his calendar to focus on all that. So the plan is that the podcast will remain fortnightly, but in order to allow Chris a bit more time to focus on other stuff, Chris will only be appearing on every other episode for the foreseeable future. In the intervening episodes, I will be joined, and this is quite exciting really, by not one, not two, but three new co-hosts who will keep Chris's chair warm for him while he's off hobnobbing with Alan Titchmarsh and pruning roses and things. I don't know how all three of them are going to fit on the one chair, but I'm sure they'll work it out. So anyway, without further ado, but with plenty of fanfare, I'm going to introduce you to your new co-hosts. So rather than just getting other members of the Guns on Pegs team to step in, we've done something a bit more creative, and we have turned to the audience to unearth the next big names in shooting podcasting. All three of your new hosts are members of the most noble order of the Garters, and they are, in no particular order, Jake Woolf. Jake is a man of very many hats. His day job is working at a leading racing stud farm, but that's really only when he's not organising podcast shoot days, running his shooting side hustle at Branches Park, where he does mini-driven and walked-up shooting trips, running his other side hustle as a shooting photographer, or training his impeccable gun dogs under the banner of Cooley River Gun Dogs, or being the Garter Distribution Centre, or one of any number of things that he gets up to in order to avoid doing any real work. Jake is the embodiment of everything that this podcast has become. A passionate game shot, all about building communities and making friendships and having fun out in the field. He's continually gone above and beyond to help and support the podcast over the last few years, so it's only fitting that he is here. Next up, we have Avian Sandercock. Avian is an extravagantly bearded Cornishman with a penchant for the finer things in life. He's the former head distiller at Wrecking Coast Distillery in Cornwall, where he made industrial quantities of gin and fruit liqueurs, which would put even the most enthusiastic slow gin maker to shame. Now that he's retired, he spends his days wrangling a camera, documenting the goings-on at his DIY syndicate shoot, which you can see on his YouTube channel. Finally, but by no means least, we have Sam Turner. Sam is a deer farmer in Devon, where he runs a small herd of red deer, supplying venison to local consumers at various markets and shows, as well as further afield through an online shop. He's a fan of unusual shotguns and an enemy of goats, or should that be that goats see him as an enemy? Sam, which is it?
It's mutual, definitely mutual.
Good. Okay. And so with that is your new Guns on Pegs podcasting team. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, George.
Hey, George, you're right. Hello.
Yes, doing very well. Thank you. Doing very well. Avian, remind me, what is the name of your YouTube channel?
Cunningly titled A Year in the Woods.
And that's doing all the little jobs around the shoot, right, for the most part?
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of inherited a little syndicate shoot that had been long-standing, but sadly went downhill. And that was actually the basis of my letter getting my garters back in the day, trying to work out why the guns couldn't understand that they wanted more birds for less work and less feeding. So we took it on April of last year. And the little videos are really just charting the progress we're making, or lack of it in some circumstances. And it really majors on the work we're doing in the woodland, bit of woodland restoration, wildlife and habitat management, and really just try and have a little bit of fun.
Very nice. And Jake, you've been all over the place recently. Is the stud farm still there? Do they need you anymore? What's going on?
Oh, no, they do need me. But it's still standing and it's going very well. But you're quite right, George, had a very interesting few days traveling what feels like, well, it was over 700 miles actually. So by the time I got home on Saturday lunchtime after traveling to Norfolk, Wales, Dorset, and then back home again for some epic shooting and photography. So yeah, it's good.
Excellent. Well, this is all very exciting. But before I let you start celebrating and have a drink, I think we do just need to help the audience get to know you a little bit. So just as standing next to someone on the peg offers a window into their soul, so does their choice of desert island shooting. So I thought we'd turn things on their head a little bit, and I'm going to ask each of you to describe your desert island shooting dream final day. And I'm going to start with Avian. So, these are your words. You wrote these words.
I did.
The extinction level event asteroid hits tomorrow. Your affairs are in order. Your loved ones and enemies are reconciled. Your dogs are fed and the tomatoes are watered. Your last day begins. How?
That's interesting, George. When I first wrote these, I think back in the day, it was all looking at the end of shooting, and I just always felt it was a little bit doom and gloom for the shooting market. So I thought if we took it outside of everyone's control and it was an asteroid, and thankfully you and Chris took it on. So I must admit, I never thought I'd actually get asked myself. So the three of us, Jake, Sam and myself, we're self-appointed Guns on Pegs podcast, keepers of all the facts and figures, and dare I say, probably quite thankless nerds, and the asteroid event days on different episodes are always the highlight of the pod for us, and gives us something to really discuss and fall out over, and we endlessly debate it. And I think for me, knowing now that I have access to the full resources of the Guns on Pegs podcast, which includes the private jet, the time machine, helicopters. My favourite was the belief suspension devices and talent enhancers, which may not have always been particularly mentioned, but from listening back to some of the asteroid days, they're certainly there. And for many people, the ability to bring people back from the dead, I think allowing them to shoot with relatives and past friends and what have you. It was very, very, very tempting to go wildly over the top here and draw out some of the ones that Jake, Sam and I have discussed over the last year or so. Sort of outlandish days with the rich and famous, shooting at legendary venues and taking eye-watering bags. And at one point, over a few glasses of wine, we'd even pondered whether you could actually shoot a T-Rex from a high seat.
It would have to be quite a high seat.
We did wonder how high the seat would be to stop it being pretty much suicidal. But in truth, honestly, I'd like two things. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed my shooting. I always enjoy time in the field, but I enjoy some of the simpler things, the camaraderie and the friendship. So for me, I'd like to make it a 2-part day. So try and make 2 days into one.
Okay.
My bank manager always does tell me I try and spend money twice, but we'll give it a go here. So I'd like a summer's evening in the pigeon hide with my dad when he was in his prime. And I'd also like 20 gun day just on our little farm shoot that we've all spent so much time and effort bringing back to the fore. Shoot with a 10-gun team and bring 10 mates, so we do it Guns on Pegs style, Order of the Garter style. The weather will be perfect, be a nice crisp frosty day, nice stiff breeze in the right direction on every drive. It'll be dry all day, so we don't have to take 2 coats, 2 hats, 2 scarves, and we can all mysteriously shoot slightly better than usual. I'm not looking for a big bag. That's not really what it is for me at all. But I'd like to find that an anonymous benefactor has slipped a few birds into the shoot so that on every drive we find a few.
Very nice. Yeah.
And after a day of fun and laughter with some sporting birds and good company, we'll all settle back into beside the fire at our local pub, the Crow's Nest. We'll have a few pints, we'll do a bit of Mickey taking and leg pulling, and then that millisecond blinding flash of light will return us to the dust of the universe. So that's what I like. That
sounds very nice. I have to say, pigeon shooting often crops up. You'll know better than I now that because you guys have been keeping this spreadsheet, how frequently it does pop up. So that's nice. And then, yes, I mean, the other is a standard, isn't it, of being out doing what you normally do with your mates. And doing it slightly better than normal.
Yeah, it does seem to be very common that people just want their friends around them, which, for me, pretty much tells you all that shooting is and what it should be.
Absolutely. Right, Jake, give us yours.
Okay, so here we go. So I was going to do the 20 gun, 10 kind of peg thing as well, because
have I stolen your thunder, Jake?
Yeah, that we've organised it. But do you know what? I have had the opportunity in the past at the Game Fair live episodes, and I have said that I would love to do the game train. But I actually was sitting in the car one day coming back from a shoot day, and Toby was with me, and I asked him what his day would be, and I wanted to kind of get that understanding from kind of the perception of Toby, how he sees it.
We should just say Toby is your son.
Toby's my son, and Toby and I discussed at length of what our asteroid last day in the field would be, and he just said just to go to the local syndicates, and so we'd start the day on the ducks at where he keeps his pony, and that's a great first drive. Then we would nip over to Branches Park and we would do one of the drives called Thickets there. Then we would leg it up to Norfolk and we would go and do home drive at our friend's farm over there. And then we would just have a really, really good dinner with everyone. Now, the caveat is I want my little spin on it. So I've got access to the time machine. And so here we go. So it's going to be way back. We healed from Scotland, and our families were the pipers on Barra. So we would go and get our forefathers and bring one of them back, and they could pipe us in for dinner. And then, guys, because I love the night before and the night after.
Yes.
So then we would have one hell of a party. And I would bring back Freddie Mercury and Queen, and we would have a huge celebration in Branches Park, fires lit. Just the best time. So that's me, kind of with Toby, with all our friends and family. It's very, very samey, but one hell of a party in the evening.
I like that.
Well, Jake, I mean, that does sound rather a bit like the old joke of the hunter and the bear, doesn't it? That you're not really here for the shooting, are you?
Oh, definitely not. And it's really quite good because I'm not that good at shooting.
I'm trying to think about other people who've tried to talk about the evening entertainment side of things. The only one I can think of was, I think, Richard Crofts wanted to hire out Balmoral and have the Queen to a black tie dinner in the evening.
Yeah, he did, didn't he?
I can't think of anybody else who specified the evening entertainment, so I really like that. Very good, Jake. Right, Sam.
I would keep it fairly simple, and I'd take it back to the little syndicate where I first properly started as a member of a shoot, which was Tipton Shoot. I'd have the original group, and then I would also make it a 20 gun day, Guns on Peg style, so that I could include all the people I've met since then as well. We'd have a cracking day. There would be a few more birds than we used to shoot, purely so that everyone got a bit of sport. There wouldn't be any arguments in the morning about do we push the wood up or down. The birds would be where we wanted them to be. And I would definitely steal George Ponsonby's idea of having, he said, all of his Labradors. I would have my old boy D back. So I had D from Ruby with me on the day.
Brilliant.
And we'd have a cracking day of sport. We'd finish with a duck flight down by the river. And then we'd go to the pub and take the piss out of each other. And that would be it. The bomb could drop.
Very, very nice. Very nice. It's always interesting to me how much nostalgia is involved with these things, whether it's people or dogs or places. There's obviously very, very deep-seated memories with people, and they're very special in people's hearts, these things, aren't they?
I think you're absolutely right, George. It's about the people you're with, and it is interesting looking back at the spreadsheets and seeing, there are a few people who wildly go to town, and I think some of them closing West London or clay shooting off aircraft carriers. There are some fantastically imaginative ideas there, but the majority of people do tend to go back to where they had their best days and best times. It isn't about the bag or the birds necessarily. It's about the company and the experience and being part of something.
I think that closing London and hiring Balmoral and shooting off aircraft carriers are all things that I want to do in my life.
Oh yeah, don't get me wrong. I'll be there with you, Sam. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm glad that Jake did add some extravagance in, because I don't think it can all be sappy, nostalgic stuff. So that's good.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely, George. You know me. I can't just leave it there. I've got to throw something in that's extravagant.
Well, yes. Okay. So speaking of which, I think we'll do this quite quickly this time. I think in future episodes, we'll do this segment in a bit more detail. But very quickly, let's go around the group. Sam, what's that you're drinking?
So I was going to have an old crafty hen because the nights are drawing in and it's getting colder and wet. And it's a nice 6.5% punchy beer. really short story, even shorter, they didn't have any in Tesco's. So I stuck with the same brewery and got an old Golden Hen, which is very nice, a bit more summery, but it's tasty.
It's lovely stuff. That I love it.
Cheers.
Good stuff.
Jake?
I scrambled a bottle of beer from 11's on Friday, where you and I are shooting together, from the Pig Brewery, their session beer, and made sure that I knew I was coming on today. So I thought that would be a perfect beer to celebrate that day, because that was a really, really good day. And then the Pig Brewery is founded in New Forest, and it was on 11's on Friday. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to get myself one of those. So cheers, chaps.
So you're drinking stolen beer then, Jake?
I could give it back to our host, but
Well, knowing our hosts as I do, I don't feel they're short on a drop or two of booze. So more power to you. Avian, how about you?
Again, doing the spreadsheet, I've noticed that there don't seem to be enough cocktails on there. Although we class gin and tonic as a cocktail, there's a lot of beer, a lot of wine, far too much tea and coffee. So I thought I'd go for a cocktail. It's the Barman's Classic, a take on the Negroni. It's called a Boulevardier. Now, I was always told when we were doing the distillery and meeting some fantastic bartenders all over the world that the Negroni is effectively the barman's omelette. They always say if you want to test how good a chef is, get him to make you an omelette. With bartenders, it's getting them to make you a Negroni. So a Negroni traditionally is a vermouth, a bitters, quite frequently Campari, and a gin, and a little bit of orange. So you shouldn't really be able to go wrong with that, because it's 3 equal measures. But believe you me, you can get all sorts of good ones and bad ones and terrible ones. So over the years, I've taken it upon myself to learn how to make a good one. I hope I do. And a Boulevardier is an interesting take on that. It just substitutes the gin for a rye whiskey.
Interesting.
So it's not quite as dry, not quite as bitter, a bit more rounded, a bit more warming for these early cold winter evenings. So I'm enjoying one of those.
Very nice indeed.
Very nice.
Very nice.
Although apparently I'm only allowed one.
Well, I mean, it does sound like it's quite punchy.
And then 2 bottles of wine.
Yes. You have to take it steady. They do say 1 Negroni, 2 Negroni, 3 Negroni floor.
So I'm breaking with tradition a little bit. It was my wife's, she probably won't thank me for saying this on a podcast. It was my wife's 40th birthday at the weekend.
Congratulations.
Doesn't look a day over 25, of course. But we had a few friends over, and somehow there was booze left over at the end. So it's sitting in the fridge there, and I've got a nice glass of the ultimate Lady Petrol, a glass of Whispering Angel Rosé.
Oh.
We actually drank an unbelievable amount of this stuff before it was trendy on one of our annual fishing trips. One year, one of our fishing friends brought several magnums of the stuff with him, and we set about it like we wouldn't ever be able to get hold of any more. Little did we know it would become the most ubiquitous rosé that there is, but it still holds very pleasant memories for me, and of course it's very, very drinkable, which is why it's so popular.
It is alarmingly drinkable, isn't it? I think my wife and my godson's mother, Ivana, introduced each other to it, and they enjoyed it so much a couple of summers ago that it actually got renamed the chuntering, well, let's say B word rather than the Whispering Angel. But one thing we have noticed is there's quite a trend online now of people finding, I don't know what they call them, they're sort of like very similar wines that aren't as trendy, sort of not substitute wines, but sort of ghost wines that are exactly the same or from the next vineyard down from Whispering Angel, but they're only sort of like £8-9 a bottle rather than 26.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that like the Lidl version of the Penguin Bar?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's only so far that you can go with a Provençal rosé, isn't there? They don't differ that much one to the other, I think. Maybe I'm showing my ignorance of wine.
I think you're right. And I think by the second or third bottle, it probably doesn't matter much anyway.
That's typically what I find, yes. This episode of the Guns on Pegs podcast is sponsored by Just Cartridges. It's that time of year again. The pheasant season is here, and it's time to dig out the ear defenders, polish your wellies, and dust off the dog. And, of course, stock up on cartridges for the season ahead. As the UK's biggest cartridge retailer, Just Cartridges stock every major cartridge brand, and since they offer next day delivery to most of the UK, there's pretty much no more convenient way to buy your cartridges. I love Just Cartridges. I know they're always going to have what I need in stock, and I love that the cartridges come to me rather than me having to make a special journey. New for the 2024-25 game season is a discount on orders of 2,000 cartridges or more. If you're like me, you'll prefer to place one big order at the start of the season just to give you that peace of mind. And so you might have seen that in previous years, when you placed an order of 1,000 or more, Just Cartridges automatically applied a discount. This year, there's an even bigger discount when you order 2,000 or more, an average saving of around 30 quid, which pretty well covers the cost of delivery. The discount is added automatically as soon as you add 2,000 cartridges to your cart, so there's no need to enter any discount code. To take advantage of the deal and secure your ammunition for the season, just head to www.justcartridges.com. Just go to www.justcartridges.com. So, the way these episodes are going to work is that when Chris and I are on together, we will follow the format that you've all grown to know and love with a special guest each time. These episodes with Avian, Jake and Sam will be a little bit different. Chris and I felt for a long time that a shortcoming of the podcast is that sometimes we discuss things that for reasons of time and ability to do some research, we can't go into enough detail on, or the things that there's topics that deserve maybe a bit more detail. We also get a lot of follow-up correspondence that sometimes we haven't got the ability to squeeze into episodes, reactions to things that have been said and follow-ups from correspondence where we've asked for the outcome or the decision that's been made. So in these episodes, we're going to tackle some of those. So we're going to start off with a bit of correspondence. Avian, can you kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely, George. So many listeners may remember a few episodes back, Chris and George tackled the problem of a deaf spaniel. The owner, who George named Scooby, was wondering what to do about the sad situation and whether the dog's hearing problems precluded him from taking it out on shoot days, and whether he should then jump ship and get a new Labrador. Well, Scooby's been back in touch after Chris and George had a discussion on that quandary, and here's what he has to say. Thanks for discussing my deaf spaniel dilemma. I appreciated the suggestions and, just to be clear, I have nothing against Labradors, and despite being 63 years old, my hearing is good. You asked me to let you know what I decided to do. Well, I had my first day's driven shooting of the season at the weekend. As you can imagine, I had been hugely excited about it and decided to leave Blaze, my deaf dog, at home and take my wife's third child, a totally undisciplined and untrained 4-year-old working cocker. I think that's just a working cocker, isn't it?
Well, I was going to say, yeah.
He's only ever stood behind the guns and on the last drive a few times, and despite a wobbly start, picking up and dropping birds, he retrieved a pheasant on the first drive and 4 on the last. He's far from perfect, but I'm going to persevere. As for Blaze, when I got home, I got a great greeting and no sign of any sulking. He will be coming out shooting again with my wife or son, and we will take up the idea of a long lead. I will eventually be getting a Labrador, but I will have to work on the family as they are spaniel obsessives. So, guys, what do we think to Scooby's response?
I don't know why he's putting it off so much. He just needs to get a Labrador sooner rather than later, don't you think?
You Labrador boys.
Sam, well said. Well said.
I mean, Jake, you're a sort of resident gun dog man, and you are a dyed-in-the-wool Labrador aficionado, right?
Yeah, I absolutely am. So while I have these strange kind of thoughts of grandeur that maybe perhaps one day I will move to getting a working cocker, I remind myself by just looking at friends working cockers and think, no, I'm never going to do that. I'm a lab man through and through. And it's amazing, you know, we all have our little ensembles, so to speak, but we are at that point where I'm a black lab man. I know, Sam, you've got some yellows and reds and what have you, but you find your niche. Labradors are the way forward, and everyone just agrees to that. And I'm going to be very, very unpopular by saying this, but Labradors are just a lot of fun. They do everything. They're a Swiss Army knife.
And the idea of leaving his deaf dog at home and taking an undisciplined and untrained 4-year-old working cocker, is he on a bit of a hiding to nothing there?
Oh, I'd say so. But they're going to have a lot of fun, though. It's a lovely story, and best of luck to him.
Yeah, there'll never be a dull moment, will there?
No, never.
No, definitely not.
I think the rest of the team and the beaters and the pickers up will very quickly get to know the name of the new dog, won't they?
Yeah.
I mean, there's not that much difference between a deaf Cocker Spaniel and an undisciplined and untrained Cocker Spaniel, is there? I think they're broadly, I mean, that's just tautology.
I'd agree with you, George. I mean, I grew up with Labradors, and we've become Spaniel people for God knows why, but they seem to have enough blood to run their ears or their nose, but not both at the same time. And I think I've almost given myself a hernia several times, sort of blowing down the whistle, trying to get it to break the chase and come back again. And my cocker's quite well behaved, so it's going to be, I don't know, is it a bit like going from a sports car to riding in the back of a taxi, getting a boring old Labrador? Jake?
Ouch. Avian. And that's his first and last episode on the Guns on Pegs podcast.
Great, guys, I've had a lot of fun, thank you.
Yeah. It's horses for courses, and I can assure you that I have a Labrador downstairs, and I would swap him in for a working cocker. I can assure you there are times when Ash has seen 3 fields across and the keeper's gone, "Whose black lab is that?" I don't know.
Not mine.
Not mine. So, it's horses for courses. It's just nice to have dogs around, isn't it? It's what makes it so much fun. I enjoy seeing the picker-uppers out. I enjoy hearing the beaters working their dogs, and it's part of the day, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, from my point of view, that I think there are 2 ways of tackling it. Either, somebody like Jake, who's got the time invested in proper working dogs, and perhaps more people like myself who've got pets, who occasionally we take to the woods and hope they remember some of the dummy work we gave them. You've got to make allowances either way. One thing I loved about Scooby's letter was that Blaze the deaf dog is back at home on the cushion having a lovely time and isn't fretting, isn't sulking, and is probably, knowing Spaniel's, quietly sat there laughing to himself.
I think you're right. I think, and I think the other thing that's great is that, I think we mentioned it when we first read out Scooby's letter on the podcast, that it's a very sad moment when the dog who's been out on the peg with you for years can no longer do that, and the best cure for that sort of I suppose sorrow is having another dog to go out with you. So if he'd just been standing on the peg by himself the other day, I imagine it would have been far tougher, but having this other dog will have helped soften that blow, I think, which is really nice.
I think you're 100% right. It's like my cocker's now, he's rising 10 next year. And in a moment of weakness, I left my wife and Jake alone at Iford Downs for less than 2 minutes. And she came back, and apparently we're getting a Labrador. So
good man.
Watch this space. Maybe by the spring I can come back to you and give you a comparison of life with both.
Look forward to that.
I look forward to that. That's very in keeping with the format of this podcast. So look forward to that a lot.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, we'll field test it, and if I come back having pulled my beard out, you'll know it hasn't gone swimmingly.
I think it might be the other way.
I'll just blame Jake for poor Labradors. No, joking. Absolutely.
Poor breeding.
Yeah, you're right.
I know how this goes. The breeder blames the trainer blames the handler, and the handler blames the breeder.
Yes.
There is that's fair enough. That's fair enough. So, I'm here to help whenever you need, Avian. So,
I'll take you up on that, mate, because the other problem with that is that if anything goes wrong ever, and you can, if the owner complains to the breeder, or it's the same as calling somebody's children ugly, that there's no good way through that, is there?
Right, so let's move on to our next piece of correspondence. Sam, your turn to do the honours, I think.
So in the most recent episode, there was a lot of discussion about the correct number of guns to have on a shoot day. George suggesting, and I agree, that it should either be 6 or 20. Honoured member of the Most Noble Order of the Garters, Joe, has been in touch. Joe received his Garters way back in 2022 with a tail of white pheasants and hubris on his syndicate. But now he's back in touch regarding this question of organising pegs on a shoot day. He writes, after listening to last week's episode with Oliver Preston and hearing George's unpopular opinion regarding numbers of guns on shoot days, I feel this may be of interest to you and hopefully your listeners. We shot this system for the first time last season. It took a few brain-aching evenings in the pub to get it sorted, but we're very proud of the end product. It involves 12 guns sharing 8 pegs, For the system to work out, you need to shoot either 3, 6, or maybe even 9 drives, obviously 6 being the preferred. At the start of the day, rather than drawing your usual peg number, you instead draw a letter, and we used a bag of Scrabble tiles from A to L. The system we have devised, named the cricket peg system, after the shoot we first tried it on being Cricket St Thomas. If shot over 6 drives, it means you'll stand 2 drives on your own and share 4 drives with another gun. You move all around the gun line as normal, and you'll share with 4 different people throughout the day. We did a 250 bird day. If you take your average bird price this season at £50, it makes it approximately £500 a gun cheaper than your standard 8 guns. Not only does it reduce costs, but it's a great way to socialise and talk to other guns who are shooting on the day. I have attached the system, and feel free to post it on your socials if anyone else wants to give it a try. I think it's best described with a picture.
Yeah. So I've transcribed the table into our script here. Avian, can you have a crack at describing how this all works? I mean, we will put it on the Insta.
Well, in short, George, no. But I did grab the Guns on Pegs time machine. I whizzed up to Bletchley Park, got hold of Alan Turing and the Codebreaker girls. They grabbed the Rosetta Stone, and they spent a long morning trying to walk me through it. And they did display the patience of a saint teaching chess to pigeons. And I think finally I've got a fairly loose but basic grasp on this. So as I understand it, they've got the Scrabble tiles A to L, which corresponds to guns 1 through 12.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the table, so each even numbered peg is shared on each drive, and each odd numbered peg is shot solo. And then they have come up with this ingenious method of mixing up the letters so that if you have a 6-drive day, during the course of that day, every one of the 12 guns shoots 2 drives solo, and the other 4 drives are shared. And they've very cunningly worked it out that each shared drive, you share it with a different member of the 12-gun team. So there's no doubling up, and you do seem to be moving willy-nilly up and down the line. So first off, it's similar to the Garter's Day that it does mix people up. It means that you're shooting with somebody different on each shared peg. You get, unlike the Garter's Day, though, you get the opportunity for a drive on your own so it's all your fault, and a sociable drive where you mix it up and share with somebody. So first off, if that makes sense to people, I think it's a nice approach. I think it includes more guns on the field, more friends on a shoot day, helps reduce the cost. I can see their point there. But to my mind, unless everyone on your team are either Sudoku masters, cryptographers, or dabble with a bit of string theory to relax, it does seem to add a rather unnecessary levels of complexity.
You would need another person employed on the shoot just to put people on peg, wouldn't you? You know, with a clipboard with a table, a list of names going out, right, yeah, this drive, you're here with so-and-so, you're there by yourself, yeah.
100%.
Unless everyone gets it, it's going to get messy.
Definitely. I can see whiteboards and marker pens, and, you know, I think we've all, most of the days we shoot on, it's hard enough to get people to remember a single number from lifting up the shot glass to drinking it and putting it down again, let alone getting to first peg. I think the other problem with it is, to my mind, is certainly if you've got a regular roving syndicate of 12, or you've got 12 on a shoot and you shoot regularly, as long as you're all like-minded puzzle solvers, it would probably become second nature. But there's a bit of an Achilles heel with it, that it only seems to work for 3, 6, 9, 12 drives.
Yes.
If you're shooting, very few shoots will manage to get 6 in a day. I think, from my experience, 4 to 5 is about what you're going to get.
Yeah.
So, you know, it leads to potential grumbles, because very quickly, if you're shooting 4 or 5 drives, a proportion of the team, a third of the team, are likely to miss out on their solo peg. Will everybody have their fair share of the shooting? If you're doing it on a regular basis, it may well balance out, but it does leave you open to sort of, you know, I haven't had my turn. The other thing is, if you shoot the bag in a short number of drives, how does that fit? So I guess it would work really, really well as long as everybody was completely bought into it and was of that mindset that, knocking out the Times crossword blindfold just comes naturally to them.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at it. The thing I was trying to work out is if there is a pattern to how many pegs one moves up. And I think the answer is no, there isn't.
No.
So maybe, but I guess if they've all bought into it and they've decided that this is, a fun way to do it, and, however it comes out, and that's fine, then I think they will have a tremendous time with it.
Couldn't agree with that more. I think you're absolutely right. But I think you really would have to have that either sort of sewn into your lapel so you can refer to it, or etched into your stock so you can have a quick look, or, hanging in the gun bus so third drive A goes to solo and E and C shoot. Looks a
Avian,
bit...
I can tell you hosting shoot days is hard enough with just 1 to 6 or 1 to 8 or 1 to 9, this would be a nightmare for any host.
I mean, we've all been on second or third drive and somebody's going, well, I drew 8, so that means I went up 3. So am I 1 or 2 or was I 9? And okay, the letters to a degree take that out. The good thing perhaps is that once you've drawn your letter, you're that letter all day.
Yeah.
So you've only got one thing to remember, but then you do have this sort of Mayan calendar of density.
Somebody is going to need a crib sheet, if not everyone. If you can reproduce the table on the game card or something like that, then everybody will have something to refer to, or one person will, and they'll be able to tell everyone where to go. But if you haven't got the nice regular up 2 or up 3 or down 2 or down or whatever it might be, where you can just add or subtract, that's nice and straightforward. But if there's some sort of complicated equation going on, or even, as it appears to be the case, it's pretty much random what your next number is going to be, then it's a recipe for chaos, isn't it?
I think it is. And if it goes to pot, how do you recover it?
Just have all 12 people on one peg.
Yeah. I mean, at least on a day, if people forget their numbers and it all goes to pot, you can always reset and say, right, well, can you remember the first number you drew? Right, we'll start from there and start again. But I think with this, if it starts to go off the rails, it really does.
Indeed. Have you guys heard of the Durford wheel?
Yes.
We have. I think, Jake, you were talking about this when we were having a chat the other week, weren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. The Durford wheel's principle is that you move from the end to the middle and back again, rather than being on the ends for a couple of drives and then in the thick of it. So your peg drawing takes place in the standard way, but after standing on the number you draw on the first drive, your next peg is the one that falls after it on the wheel, moving in a clockwise direction. It's quite a simple drawing. I actually remember when you guys at Guns on Pegs did this back in 2014, I believe. And I remember looking at it going, and trying to work it out, and then thinking, I won't work it out. If I ever get to this, I'll enjoy it. But it's a good and it's a fun system, isn't it?
I've never shot on a day that uses it, but Chris is a big fan. I know that.
Maybe Chris can take us all on a day and we can use it.
But don't forget, it was Chris's fault that Guns on Pegs went 10 go up and 10 go down. That I think that stopped Ben in his tracks, didn't it?
I think that the shoots are a bit different now from what they used to be. That not necessarily being in the middle of the line means you're going to get the most shooting these days, does it?
That's
there's
fair.
A lot of times you'll stand on an end peg where you think you're going to be quiet, and you're the busiest person on the field. So
very true.
It's not always guaranteed that outside is out of the fun.
Oh yeah,
no, that was very true, Sam.
I mean, it was something we used to suffer on our little syndicate, and that was partly sort of the roots of its demise, was they did the same thing every time. So you'd see at the draw, people would draw a peg number, and you could see them mentally calculating how their day was going to go. So, well, I'll be out of it in this one. I might get a bit on the third.
Yeah,
I probably won't bother taking any cartridges on the fourth, and by the fifth, I might be in the thick of it. And it kind of preset the attitude towards the day. Whereas I tend to forget what's going on, and every day's a new sense of wonder and fascination.
It's funny, we do that. We draw pools when we go up salmon fishing, and it always follows the same pattern, moving up to. So we have had lengthy conversations about what is the perfect number to draw on the morning of the first day, so that you get to fish, because there's 7 pools and you repeat sort of just over halfway through the week. You get to fish some of the pools twice, but not all of them. So then but they don't all fall so that you fish all of the best pools twice, or doesn't quite work. So we've had lots of debates as to whether it's best to draw 7 or 2 or whatever it might turn out to be to get the best fishing over the course of the week. And then it then comes down to personal preference, because there's some people who love a particular pool because they've happened to have caught fish there, whereas somebody else has fished it for 10 years and has never seen a fish there. So it can be that
that's just salmon fishing though, isn't it?
It is just salmon fishing, but I think it also applies to drives in a sense that there's some drives that I shoot regularly where I think, well, I always shoot really badly here, so I don't mind being out of the action on that drive, whereas I absolutely love the birds on this drive, so I really hope I'm in the middle for that one. And so and I might have a different set of criteria for.
But then there's nothing better than when you pull number 9 and the host comes up and says, right, you go back gun on this one. Then you're in the ideal spot, aren't you?
Yeah, very true.
I think that's a good point, Sam. And I think, if you've got a good shoot captain or a responsive shoot captain, to have the draw is part of the theatre of the day, and it's a good thing to come back to if you need to move the guns around. The traditional moving up to, you're always flanked by the same people, and I think it would be quite nice to try and mix that up a little bit, because I think we've all been on a day where left and right are either, dare we say, a little greedy or even worse, a little good. And you tend to get your eye wiped and don't get to see another lot of action. So I think to have a good shoot captain who's got the confidence to say, no, I'm going to move you out of line and I want you there. So you can move somebody who's perhaps doing rather too well, put them in sort of on the chiller for a moment, and maybe bring somebody who's unfortunately been out of it, bring them into the line a bit more.
Yeah, but Avian, does it actually matter if all we are really happy about is that monster sky-high pigeon that one person pulls out of the sky?
I've heard about this, yes. How high was this pigeon?
George?
Well, it was quite a good bird.
George?
It was quite a good bird, but tell me how many shots it took.
That doesn't count. My mantra on a shoot day is always have a go at the high pigeon, because if you miss it, everybody will go, well, you had a try. But if you hit it, you are pretty much God for the day, aren't you?
Oh, I don't know about that, because I think if you miss it, it can bugger up the rest of your drive. I find that if I miss a speculative pigeon, I then sort of slightly lose confidence in my shooting. I tend to go for them because I sort of feel like you have to a bit. But I would rather have not missed it and then shoot well for the rest of the drive, rather than having had a sort of long distance poke at something, not really expecting to kill it, only to then shoot like an idiot for the rest of the drive because I'm still, beating myself up over the pigeon.
There's a bit of that, isn't there? But you do feel like you are just an absolute shooting. You feel like digweed when you walk back in. And,
I'm with Jake on this. I think there was a lovely, I think I've still got it on shot cam video somewhere, where we were shooting a little day and this massive pigeon went through. I had a swing at it and pulled the trigger, and you can actually hear my mate next to me on the peg down going, well, that was a waste of a cartridge, as this pigeon just went and came sailing down. And for all the pigeons I've ever missed, and believe me, I think we saw fewer pigeons at Iford Downs than I've missed over the years. That one will always stand out in memory, and I've forgotten all the others. And I think to your point, George, yes, it may mess up the rest of your drive, but would the drive not have been messed up anyway?
Well,
is it worth it? I think it's worth a go.
It's the self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? Because I'm as I've talked about on the podcast before, I'm a faintly neurotic shot, and I sort of then allow these things to prey on my mind, and then it's a question of, even as the pigeon approaches, I'm thinking, oh, if I miss this, it's going to bugger me up for the rest of the drive. So it's a mind games thing, and I think different people approach.
So as soon as you see a pigeon, it's all going wrong for you.
Not if I don't shoot at it. If I don't shoot at it, then it's entirely my own doing, and it can't be blamed on the pigeon. But if I do shoot at it and it goes wrong.
I think Jake did say to us, though, George, that all your claims over the years of, dare I say, slight dufferdom in the line are perhaps misrepresented. He said you shot rather well.
Well, I mean, it's very kind of him to say that. I shot well on 2 drives, the first 2 drives of the day, and then it did go rather downhill after that. most notably on the drive when Jake shot his rather good pigeon, I had a couple of barrels at a very, very long pigeon and then proceeded to shoot like a complete idiot for the rest of the drive. And then the following drive, I was also pretty poor.
But George, it's funny how you mentioned about mind games. I made the decision on Friday to not count my cartridges. It's something which I'm neurotic for. As soon as I pull the trigger on one, and on the first drive, I was 1 for 1. I was out on peg 8 and I didn't have much over me, 1 for 1. So I said to myself on Friday, I'm not counting my cartridges. I'm just going to put them straight in the bucket. And that gave me a huge amount of confidence, because if I do, as you were just saying, pull the trigger at things and it does happen, you're like, oh, I'm 2 for 6. Oh, no, now I'm 10 for 2 still. And it just muddles your whole day up.
Oh, Jay, I can understand that, mate. And if you're trying to remember the cricket peg system as well, you'd be a gibbering wreck, wouldn't you?
Now, just moving on from numbering and mind games a little bit, I did just want to very quickly have a chat about the number of guns in a line sort of throughout history, because I was suggesting on the previous episode that I thought that there was that sort of the traditional number was 6. And I did a little bit of research over the last week to see if I could find anything to back that up. And I have to say, I've not found a great deal. I have found a reference to King George V shooting a day in 1913, where there were 7 guns in the line. And I also found a reference on a website called something like edwardianlady.co.uk that has an essay from somebody written sort of for the advice of ladies who were hosting shooting parties, that made reference to there being 6 guns. But beyond that, I've not been able to find anything else at all that supported my original idea that 6 was the traditional number to have in a gun line.
No, I've been having a look around. I can't find anything definitive. There doesn't seem to be, this is how it should be. Interestingly enough, there's one of the Facebook groups. People have been digging up a load of old shoot cards. And they're going back sort of 1890s and forwards. Sadly, most of those cards will record the game shot, but don't necessarily carry the number of guns shooting. So it seems to be that a party was made up. And in some ways, I think Oliver Preston's comment from the last podcast, that maybe it was down to the number of rooms available, or the number of...
Or how many mates you had.
How many seats there were at the dining table. And it does seem to be that just a party was put together, and that sort of the dinner party etiquette of the day was somewhere between 5 and 10 people got together and they had a bit of a shoot.
It was, George, you obviously said 6. I sent a picture to you boys, and an old boy I know brought round a book to me last week called The Badminton Library, which is all about
That's the one.
Shooting and field sports. Going back to 1886, there were all sorts of different bag sizes on all sorts of different quarries, from grouse to swans, believe it or not. But the 6 was the most common number for a team of guns. But there was 4s, there was 5s, there was obviously a lot of 6s, 7s, 8s, 10s, 11s, a lot of single gun days as well, mostly taken up by people who started with Sir or Earl or Lord, who would go out and shoot hundreds of things all to their own gun. But I was looking through it hoping to find some sort of reason for the number, but nothing.
No.
Nothing.
No, there doesn't seem to be, unless it's lost in the midst of time, but there just doesn't seem to be sort of a point of etiquette, and in many ways you'd think if there was something to it, you think there would be, because, for example, in the Victorian era, they had the language of flowers, didn't they? That depending on the species of flower or the makeup of the bouquet you'd sent somebody, it had specific meanings that were recorded and had to be carefully adhered to. So you kind of intuit that if there was a structure behind how the teams were made up, the bloody Victorians would have written it down somewhere. And same as Sam, I can't find anything.
Isn't there something? It's about that knowledge that is just assumed to be known that nobody bothers writing down, and so the reasons for it do get lost. Yes. I think there's an entry in one of the very early dictionaries that something like donkey. Everybody knows what a donkey is. And one imagines that in the future the donkey might have gone extinct, in a million years, and there's not many drawings of them or whatever have survived, and so historians and archaeologists will be desperately trying to find out what a donkey was.
Yes. Yeah, I think you're right. Because, on the subject of dictionaries, I don't know if you've come across it, George, but there's, I'd love to get a copy of it. There's a dictionary, I think it's from the 1700s, where a Portuguese chap wanted to write a French-English dictionary. Unfortunately, he spoke neither French nor English. But he managed to get hold of a Portuguese to French dictionary and just did straight translations, and then found a French to English version and just or Portuguese to English, and then just translated that. And if you have a look through, some of the mangled phrases and bits he's come out with are truly magical.
Brilliant. I really like, but it's so interesting when you think about your standard drive, and we were talking about whether you're in or out of the shooting. If you're at, say, 1 and 8, you can see the argument that if you wanted to make it so that everybody was having a tremendous time all of the time, you would make it 6 guns, because you're chopping off the 2 ends where there's the least shooting, and so you start numbering, as it were, from where peg 2 would be. That becomes your peg 1. And so everybody's a bit more in the shooting if there's 6. But then you think, well, there must be a reason that we have 8, and that's presumably to do, or as it might be 9 or 10, and that's presumably to cover more of the ground and prevent birds from squirting over the side.
That's an interesting point, George. Maybe it's a combination of things, because I think after the last episode, Sam, Jake, and I were having a chat about it, and we thought maybe the more modern 10 is purely a way of reducing the cost per individual. So a bit more bang for the buck, but. It may be a case because, you read it in the reports of the big bags from the early 1900s. You mentioned King George's day. They were shooting 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 birds, but I think they were noted for bag size rather than sporting quality.
Yes.
So maybe as new strains of pheasants were being bred with different flying characteristics, and because the high bird is a fairly recent thing,
very much so.
But if birds were being presented more and more sportingly, perhaps you did need bigger numbers of guns to actually, like you said, spread along the line, take these birds on, and actually meet the bag and meet the requirements.
Maybe it was they had 6 guns there, and they were all a bit of a crap shot, so they thought they'd get a couple more in and squeeze them all a bit closer together to meet the bag a bit sooner.
Oh, you've been on my syndicate, have you?
Yeah. I wasn't going to name any names.
Well, so if anybody can shed any light on any of this, if you're a shooting historian or have some sort of ancient tome that aimed at gamekeepers or people setting up shoots for the first time, and there is an explanation as to why the number of guns is what it is and why it's changed over time, I would love to know. So drop us an email, please.
Yeah, definitely. I'd be absolutely fascinated.
I think, chaps, we should probably think about wrapping things up. It's been tremendous fun. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to doing more of these. But which of you would like to be the first of the 3 of you to do the outro?
Go on,
Here
Jake.
we go. So before we go, all that remains for us to say is that there is a final reminder that you can get your hands on the exclusive Guns on Pegs podcast Shooting Stock Garters by sending us your shooting dilemmas, your unpopular opinions, or sharing your forgotten drives, or McPod suggestions. Just send us an email to pod@gunsonpegs.com, and if we read it out in the next episode, we'll send you some of the garishly pink shooting stock garters. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. Until then, thanks very much for listening, and goodbye.